Okay, we are returning from our break. The time is now 10:15. And our next agenda item is agenda item F, and we have annual financial insurance evaluation. This is an action item, and we have fiscal analyst here to present. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Graham, members of the council. For the record, I'm Cicely Fleming. I'm the annual financial institution. All right. Oxford School District School Institution. I apologize. Nancy, will you control the slide for me, please? So, as part of the council's annual procedures, we review all the financial institutions on the pre-approved list, as well as the four templates of the bottom of credits annually to get council approval for using the following year. So we evaluated all the credit ratings for the institutions currently on the list with the four major credit rating firms, S&P, Moody's, Fitch, and AM Best. And you evaluate their long-term issuer rating as well as the outlook for each of them. And that's presented here. The only addition to the list is really just to affirm the Continental Casualty Company. That was when we, in our last meeting, when we considered CNA Financial Corporation, that Casualty Continental was a subsidiary of that between 22 years. And so we went ahead and looked at the credit ratings for that. They actually came out even higher than CNA. And so we've added that to the list as well. So that's the only real change there. And then for there's no changes to the letter of credit template, but when we looked at the bond template, we look at these every year, and every year we see just something a little bit different that it's like, oh, well, maybe we should change that. We noticed, maybe we can switch the slide.
Slide here.
On the first page, we reference a site certificate, but we didn't actually mention that it's potentially amended from time to time. And on page 2, we had just had that no modification to the site certificate shall be binding to the surety. So, it actually probably makes sense in asking if we track the changes.
Just to complete that thought, if you look at that link to the second paragraph, it essentially says that you can't modify that. It had said you can't modify the site certificate without the written consent of the surety. So go ahead.
Right. So, sorry, for the record, that was Patrick Furler, counsel of those things. Keep going. Perfect. This is Cicely again. And so we wanted to make sure that that language was tying back that no modification to the amount required in the site certificate. So that every amendment doesn't have to be then approved by the surety, because that language was really intended to say that if we change the base amount of the restoration cost in amendment to a site certificate, that doesn't automatically increase the bond, because obviously the surety would have to sign off on that. So this, by adding the amount required in the site certificate, that allows us to make a different change to the site certificate. It does not impact the bond or amount of the bond or the financial insurance amount, that we don't have to get rid of the surety on that. And so in doing that, adding the amount required in the site certificate, we also wanted to add up in the first paragraph the reference that the site certificate could be amended from time to time as well.
Councilmember Condon. Thank you. Cindy Condon for the record. So I just want to make sure I understand this fully. So we deem an increase in the financial insurance is required. And so we make the change in the certificate, amending the certificate. Doesn't affect the financial institution at all.
But we would require an updated financial instrument with the new amount. If the financial institution says, no, we're not going to go there, then that initiates a whole process on our part in terms of, okay, we're going to take these steps. We need that amount. You're not increase the bond and letter of credit. And so we're going to take. We may take.
Right. For the record, this is Cicely Fleming. I believe at that time that would be on the developer of this certificate holder would have the opportunity then to provide financial assurance from a different financial institution. If the institution that they were with didn't have it, we would, give a little bit of grace period for that to allow that to happen before we.
Right, but it starts that process in.
Absolutely.
Okay, that should get where we need
Absolutely,
this
yes,
bond, here's the tiny.
Yes.
Or we get our duck.
absolutely, yes. Once council approved an amendment to a site certificate that increased a bond, or a letter of financial assurance amount, yes, absolutely, we would be going back and making that modification, to those financial instruments.
Secretary Cornett?
Yeah, and just for the record, talk for him. And just as a reminder, so if council approves an amendment and, say add a solar component to a lumen utility, prior to beginning construction of that solar component, they would have to submit a new bond with that full amount. So again, they would go to the surety and say, hey, now we're, for this facility, it's not X, it's X plus Y. And the surety would either give them that bond amount or not. And then if not, they would have to seek another one. So if it's an amendment, they couldn't begin construction of those components without providing that additional bond. If it's inflationary, we already have that built in, and that's just an annual requirement anyway. But going back to what you said is, if for whatever reason the surety said no, and that put at risk something, say there's different circumstances that I'm not thinking of, then we have the built-in language that Cicely was talking about in the bond, which would then trigger the timing for us to say, you need to give us a bond, an updated bond with an X amount of time, or we're going to call that bond. Because, they will let us know, the surety will give us a heads up, 90 days, 90 or 120 days, whatever the time frame is, that they're going to cancel the bond. And that is what triggers then our timing to say, okay, what should we do? When is the certificate holder going to get us a bond? When do we have to take action to make sure that we have something in place just in case?
I'm just going to follow up. So there are really two stages to it. There's no increased risk to us ever because they can't start construction. So that's first. And then I think during the past 3 years, we've sufficiently gone through our timing requirements. So we know we're covered through, nope, we have a financial institution that says, no, we're going to, or a section that doesn't have a bond to go through that. So, yeah, I think that works. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the record, this is Cicely Fleming. And this was one of those points where it was like, could a surety come back if we were to make a claim on this one? Come back and say, well, we're operating under the fourth amended site certificate right now, and the bond just says the site certificate. And it doesn't show that there's an amendment, and we didn't sign off on any of these future amendments. So that's why we wanted to be very clear that it was the amount of the site certificate that we then obviously agree with the surety we need to sign off on. And then we have reference to as maybe amended from time to time to eliminate any of that kind of sticky. So those are the only changes to the bond template. Again, there weren't any changes to the letter of credit template. So just those templates and the financial assurance provider list. Only two things that we'll be requesting your action on today. I would also like to request a little additional council direction, if you wish, because we evaluate these credit institutions annually. We just kind of wanted to get council direction. Should we do it more often? We do it right now, we do it annually or as needed. So if we get a request from applicant for a developer, then we would obviously do that, or if there's some global circumstance that, things are failing that prompts us to take a look at that, then we do under those circumstances. But we just wanted to check with council, see if you want that done biannually, quarterly, whatever you want. If you don't want any changes, we just wanted to give you that option. And then see if there's anything else that you'd like us to do as far as our evaluation of these entities. If there's a different way you want us to look at them, gather additional information, or perhaps you just want to leave that open to.
Thank you. Councilmember Condon?
I think you said the comments for the record. I think annually, what we're doing now, annually is fine. Option 3 is the one that I think is the most appropriate. I believe we talked about this possibility before. And so I would highly recommend option 3 because it speaks to annuals generally enough, but if staff sees the market's roiling and we've certainly seen some of that, that there's an opportunity to say, okay, we're going to.
Thank you for that comment. Anyone else?
Chair Grail, this is Kent. I concur with Cindy's comments.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Secretary Burnett?
I did have the opportunity to have a conversation with Councilmember Byer, and she had the same thoughts as well. So I just want to make sure that I can take that off the record on her behalf.
Thank you. And so that takes care of the first issue. And then are there any comments around the current practice or doing something different or regarding the data or methodology?
Chair Grail, this is Kent. I think option 1 is fine. No change requested. I think the way we're gathering the data and the methodology used to make those determinations is fine. We can always change that in the future if something comes up. Seems to be working fine now.
Thank you, Vice Chair Howell. Councilmember Condon?
So just a question. So this is kind of the first. Option 1 speaks to the first element, but not the review process, or is the review process part of this, or is that a separate?
Right, so what I just heard the recommendation to be would be that option 1 or 2 would be annually and as needed to complete the evaluation. Now we're speaking to, what does that evaluation entail? Should the firms, I know we researched the 4 firms, is there something to that process? What do we look at?
So option 1 is what Candace suggested, includes the annual, or option 3 and 3.
Secretary?
No.
Mixing and matching.
Yeah.
So for the record, 2 different questions, 2 sets of options.
Yeah.
So the first we, I think, dealt with, which is really option. So the first question, frequency. And the answer that I heard was option 3, continue to do it annually, continue to bring the institutions and analyze them annually unless there is some intervening issue throughout the year which could trigger an event for review. That's the first question. Second question is, how do we evaluate these institutions?
Right.
Those are 2 different questions. And so Vice Chair Howe said for the second question, continue the current practice of reviewing, the credit rating agencies versus something else.
Okay, I guess what I'm a little bit confused about is we didn't take a vote on that first question.
We're not
right?
voting.
It's not, and we're not voting on.
This is direction by
This is
council.
direction on- Okay, oh, sorry.
Yeah, so we'll go back to the vote on the bond template language and the institutions. This is simply direction to staff on these questions, which you can change it at any time in the future. You know, we want to be reflective of, you know, your comfort level on the frequency that we bring these to council, but also what kind of information would you like us to review when we do that? And so I think the question now is really that second one, which is, you know, as Cicely talked about, Moody's, Standard and Poor's, those typical credit agencies, we go through and pull that out. And Nancy, can you go back to the first slide, the table? Which that reflects that analysis, which is what we've historically done. There could be other things that if this is not adequate, if there's more information you would like us to look into, and frankly, we didn't provide really any detailed secondary option because we didn't have a good secondary option. But if there is additional information that would be helpful that you think we could gather on these institutions that would make you more comfortable, you know, and have additional detail about their financial liability, we would certainly be happy to do that.
This is Cindy, and yeah, option one, I think the reason is fine. The only thing I would add is, you know, just in the everyday news cycle or whatnot, if something is heard, these evaluations are done, I think annually as well. You know, I know they try and update them, but we've seen some issues in that process as well. So if there's something heard in the news or whatnot, I would hope that would prompt please.
But for the record, Todd Cornett, and I think there's a recent example of this, you know, which I don't know if this triggered any of the institutions that we have on the list, but you know, the more .com related financial institutions, you know, in California, you know, one or two of those, you know, became insolvent and got taken over, and so that, in my mind, would be a pretty good example for us to then say, hey, there's something going on here. Do we have any of these institutions that are on our list that would trigger that review to make sure, you know, and not only are they on our list, but do we have any certificate holders who have bonds or letters of credit with them, which then would generate that question of, you know, do we have concerns, you know, if something bad happened and we needed to pull that bond?
And then I would guess that it's something other than these reviewers, S&P Moody. They may not upgrade their rating, so it's just a deeper dive in some other method using. Thank you.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
yes, Councilmember Devlin.
I'm not getting entirely confused here, but is the motion before us to approve option one? And then under
No.
the paragraph before it, under option three, option one, to still keep the annual reviews, but to keep the portion in this language that as necessary, or is it just to approve current practice?
So I'm gonna ask Council Secretary Burnett to address this, please.
Thank you, Councilmember Devlin. So for the record, Todd Cornett, and I'm just going to say my apologies. You know, this was my idea to kind of set this up this way, Cicely. So I'm going to take responsibility. This is confusing. I recognize that. So my apologies for that. So what you have on the slide before you right now, we're not asking for a vote. We are asking simply kind of direction. And we will follow that direction, you know, 2 questions, separate options, and we're looking for your direction on that. The vote itself is what we would typically do is on the list of institutions. Nancy, can you go back to that table? Yeah, so the vote would be on these institutions, which Cicely has done the work on to determine that they are all viable in terms of their credit ratings. And then, can you go to the next slide, Nancy? And then the second vote would be the form, the template of the bonds and letters of credit, where these are the only proposed modifications to the bond. So those two things are what we're asking you to vote on. So you can correct me on anything that I got wrong or confused.
No, absolutely not. That is well characterized. I just love that we have that on recording, that he's the one that made it confusing.
Councilmember Devlin, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And since this isn't part of the vote, then based on the discussion, do you think the direction has been given to do this annually, but if circumstances warranted, to bring something to the council, if circumstances warrant more than annually for a particular party or?
Yes,
Yes, that's what we heard,
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman. So that's our direction. What we heard, and this is still being kind of discussed, so certainly if you have different opinions, is that we heard really it's sort of the option 3 with the option 1, that we would come annually and as necessary if there are any sort of intervening issues in the banking industry, either nationally or regionally. And then the second question is that we would continue the current practice of just evaluating the credit rating agencies for these on that annual basis. So that's the direction we heard.
I think we all are. Okay,
But again, my apologies, probably should have separated this into the first question and then the vote and then got into this direction. So
sounds good. Got it all squared away. So here we are.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Vice Chair Howell.
are we at the point we're ready to make that motion? I think so. This is Kent, and I move the council approve the recommended templates for financial instruments and the recommended list of council-approved financial institutions for use by site certificate holders in obtaining financial instruments as presented and recommended by staff.
Thank you. We have a motion. Council.
For the record, I second it.
Thank you, Councilmember Talkto. We have a motion and a second. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Martha Real,
Yes.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Kent Howe,
Yes.
Jordan Truitt,
Yes.
Barry Chalk-Tooth,
Yes.
Richard Devlin.
Yes.
Motion carries, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, everyone. Cicely, always great to see you. Appreciate you getting through that and definitely hold on to Tom's comments. All right, our next agenda item is agenda item G, this is organizational expertise standard review. This is an information item. We have Sarah Esterson, Senior Policy Advisor, to present. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning. Is the audio okay? Good morning, Chair Grail and Vice Chair Howell, members of the council. Just for the record, my name is Sarah Esterson. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor and Coordinator for and agenda item G today is intended to be brief, but also a workshop style presentation. It's not an action item, but we want to provide council an opportunity to pose questions, thoughts, ideas about the standard. We want you to walk away from this presentation with strong comfortability of what the standard means to you. It's a question that we in the Second Division ask all the time. What does the standard mean to you? And let's make sure we're consistent. We want you to think about the evidence that's being provided during the permitting process and whether that evidence is sufficient and whether it needs to change now or in the future. Just to note that it is our intent to provide these overviews on the standards over time. For each one or any particular standard that we're having questions on or that you're interested in, we have done presentational organizational expertise. The third presentation we also assurance as well as fish and wildlife habitat and land use to make this process as we go along. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is our third iteration of the overview on organizational expertise standards. So it's intended to build off of and incorporate prior discussion and input and changes. That starting in 2021. So a brief overview of the standard, just want to make sure everyone knows that the statutory authority for the adoption of this standard is in for us. Just to go over what the standard requires. So the organizational expertise standard requires the council to find that the applicant has the ability to construct, operate, and retire the facility in compliance with council standards and site certificate conditions. What does that mean? How do you do this? Well, the standard offers some support. It says that you have to find, demonstrated in the permitting process, design, construct, and operate the facility. Conditions that they can design, construct, and operate the facility in a manner that protects public health and safety. And thirdly, that they have the ability to restore the site to usable non-hazardous emissions. You know those words, those sort of tie directly to the financial assurance standard. So for talking purposes, we're going to talk kind of in the space of those first two prompts, which are supporting findings to the people. So ultimately today, we're going to assess the evidence that's being provided for staff and council. Next slide, please, Lindsay. So a challenging or interesting but not uncommon aspect of evaluating the standard for many applicants is a project-specific liability policy. They request almost every time, and council has continuously approved project-specific policies reliance on the parent company to meet the standard. But over the last couple of years, we've really been, asking questions about whether this is really appropriate, or what risk is being left on the table, given that these applicants are limiting ability. And so, actually have access to the technical and financial resources of their parent. And things go wrong. Safety and more. So the type of evidence that we're getting in a preliminary application or in transfer request, really regardless if it's a project specific policy or not, supported by our application requirements, is a summary table of project experience, a summary of qualifications of staff, typically those that are members of parent. We get a statement of whether citations have been issued for those projects developed by a similar subsidiary of parent company. Policy hasn't had experience that more oftentimes than not. And then we get a high level summary of communication, generally of the consultant that the applicant has for real work. During construction and operation. We also get a comfort letter from the bank describing their willingness to issue a bond for the commissioning amount. A list of evidence. So it is interesting on the scale of evidence and actual facts and data that we get for other exhibits. This is different. Other exhibits might have desktop analysis, field surveys, state and local agencies, experts in the subject matter that we can talk to about the accuracy of the evidence. We don't have that in the organizational expertise here.
Sarah, this is Marcy, and I might, if you said it, I'm sorry, my brain started going back. So when they send Lois, it's just like a bio, a couple, I feel like we've seen, but there's no statement from, like, for example, the commission, you'll see statements included, this is what I do, this is what I'm responsible for, et cetera? Are they just generic, like, hey, I'm the president of this company, I've done this, or are they giving you enough details about who they are and their experience versus just like putting snapshot line?
Well, I mean, and thinking about how to talk through this, I mean, in large part, and I'll get back to that, but it would be a level of evidence that says, I'm gonna pay on that. Well, we want the paper, there's the name, like, or even farther away from that, might say, I graduated from this university, but we don't know, did it take you 10 years or 4, and did you get straight A's or general D's? We know you graduated from college. That's kind of what we, now from qualifications of individuals, yeah, I mean, and we're really looking at it, they would give the name, the university they graduated from, their experience with the company, but our sort of issue with those specific people is we're not gonna bind to using those people or to having those people. I mean, it's a snapshot in time. They're with the parent company. But we do get enough information to know whether their experiences.
Thank you. I'll just, thank you.
Yeah, and well, if there's more to be, I'm sure we'll have more discussion.
Councilmember Bodnar?
Just a question about how you want to do this. Do you want to, do the whole thing and then?
Well, because I don't have that many slides, so I think that we have to even get the information out and then take it back, because I think you'll want to make sure. What we're going to do in the and then that makes sense. Okay, so questions about the type of evidence that we've been receiving and been evaluating, it has been brought up again in the last couple of years. And so we've really targeted our focus and asking ourselves, what are we doing? What can we do better? Next slide, please, Nancy. So some of the shifts that we've been implementing at the staff level, and I'm just going to give an example. So as I mentioned, we might get a list of projects that the parent company so instead of just taking that and saying, well, that's good, done, we now go to the developer's webpage, we see what more information we can learn about those projects. We identify the regulatory agency that issued that permit and try to better understand their permitting process. Do they have equivalent rules? Is this really relevant? Do we know in Montana and Wyoming, if they say format fee? So if we built there, that might not necessarily mean we know how to do it there, even from a cost compliance, everything really. And this aspect of going, really like internet web sleuthing is something we call like kind of fact verification. It is time consuming, it's difficult, and we're not getting very far. We haven't been picking up the phone to make phone calls to regulatory agencies to say, tell me about what the experience was when we built it. Because if that's time consuming and difficult, and it would be very helpful for the initial more clear about what level of information they need to provide. That is one thing we're at least doing, looking around to see what other information is available, what's their permitting process, even remotely close to what we do. Okay, other changes that we have been implementing, really supported by council during the permitting process, is to say if you're relying on your parent, on a signed parent permitting letter in your exhibit D that says, I affirm, acknowledge, and agree with all these representations of their reliance on us now and in the future. So we've been pushing for that. Another change that has been partially implemented in the permitting process is a request that applicants provide prior to construction signed performance guarantee that as a parent company that they will be there to pay for all obligations of the certificate. One other change that council has implemented is through, conditions where they, hopefully, you know, in our process and our current rules, all certificate holders have to report on their compliance annually. So what council has requested in some instances is that that annual review be specific on the departments and for evaluating whether there is severe issues, incidents, actions of non-compliance going on where that decommissioning bond may no longer be passed. When we evaluate the decommissioning bond at pre-construction, we don't say, does this cover unanticipated that's not what it's to restore the site of a well-operated facility. So in order to cover that gap, if there were to be one, council has said department, you evaluate that annual report. If that shows significant non-compliance, you're going to bring it back to council and adjust that to condition bond. And that's condition level. Yes.
The RJ. I know you said, oh, questions. And my last bullet point, I thought where we ended up on that was we can revisit the amount of the bond or the letter of credit, not just if there's instances of non-compliance, but if there are market changes, for example. So it does go beyond just instances of non-compliance.
Right. And the one site certificate which was West End. And that project was just approved, and so we may not have heard go through and should choose to further future site certificate. Okay, so that's the mix of changes that we've been implementing really through the permitting process with our rulemaking. We have a few other ideas that we wanted to talk to you about. So let's remember what the standard requires. It requires that the council finds the applicant has the ability to construct, operate, retire the facility in compliance with council standards and site certificate. So to me, the in compliance with council standards is really covered for the entirety of the other evaluation. So let's say that we're focusing on the evidence that we're getting for how the applicant can construct and operate this facility in compliance with the myriad of conditions in the site. It's also hard to so we're asking the question, how can we better communicate whether an applicant has the ability to construct and operate in compliance with site certificate conditions, which you should think about mitigation. Wildfire mitigation, habitat mitigation, these are long-term, expensive, detailed, we need to have for not just weed mitigation, like this, they need to have wherewithal to implement this mitigation successfully. So, and we really don't, again, evidence that we're getting is I want and don't have, or I finished the paper. Sometimes we don't even know. It's giving us a summary of very high level. We don't know successful efforts. So the way that we currently evaluate how our certificate applies with site certificate conditions, once they have the site certificate, it's in compliance. Take the site certificate, put it in a matrix, and provide a narrative or a report for each one all the way through. Why couldn't the permitting process be the same, where we have to kind of get pretty far through in evaluating what conditions are needed, but then before going to an approval step, we're looking at what their compliance plan is. How are you going to do it, and how much does it cost? And do you have enough money to implement this plan? So what we would be talking about in terms of is a detailed scope and budget. The scope can be in the form of a compliance plan. It's very similar to what we already do once you have the site certificate. And then that budget, to meet that budget, meeting their existing financial status. form of audited financial statements. This way, council has the ability to understand. And what was staying in compliance with the state certificate conditions. This would be important for us and them to know that it's clear for everyone how this is going to work.
We do follow the same approach for the scope and cost of constructing and operating the facility, requesting that they provide a forecast budget and the ability to secure the funds. Budget. And this would be under the umbrella of you have the ability to design, build, and operate this facility in a manner that protects public health and safety. But, you know, those ideas are wrought with challenges and issues, as are all ideas that we have. It would be very difficult for staff to understand if, without criteria, for staff to understand if the scope was out and if the budget was out. So it would just be data. It would have, you know, data that they create against data they get. But it would be a test points of where you are financially, where you are, what type of plan. So then another piece of evidence that is just about an applicant's financial ability, particularly LLC projects, LLC is, in our permitting process, applicants have to request and receive and execute a cost reimbursement agreement. And on average, it's our forecasted cost for the permitting process. It wouldn't be less than $300. And we have to have that on hand before getting started. And we have an obligation, if we get too close to that amount, they have to, we would amend that agreement, they have to remit those funds in order to continue. We have a policy, you generally have to be on point in order for us to release that space. So that clearly demonstrates the level of financial security to get process that certainly is very available. It's not challenging to obtain. We could either ourselves or ask applicants to describe and present that in their exhibit to as some level of financial assurance that they have to comply with. Meet the standard of. Okay, so that is the summation of. Yes. Are you waiting on me? I'm sorry. Oh, there's Brian. I'm sorry, Sarah. Well, sorry, everyone. Okay, so she's got. So I think that, so in the staff report, we provided a table that I found very interesting and just going through the exercise. We listed all the projects generally that we've gone through in the last couple of years. And we tried to circle the shifts. As performance guarantee and the parent company letter. We also provided the tables and the attachments so you can see what we're talking about. Again, these are shifts in the evidentiary threshold where we're getting new information. And so now we really, but the challenges of doing any of this outside of rulemaking really are, it's difficult to keep track of shifts we're making at a project level. We're not in rule. And we also don't get comprehensive thorough input in like a rulemaking advisory committee about what works about something, what doesn't. And we really feedback we got on the performance guarantee and signed by a parent. We didn't get pushed back, and then all of a sudden we did, and we all became comfortable in the subject matter. So there's definitely value to valuing big ideas. Big ideas are small, and one are not council about what we think we're doing.
Thank you for that. I'll just look around. Vice Chair Howell.
Thank you, Chair Grout. This is a general big comment that doesn't get into the weeds of the table that you've provided and all. And it's without a need standard. It seems the site certificate holders their site certificates are speculative. And so being speculative, that kind of implies, well, if we approve something today, it's not going to happen today. They're speculating, and it's going to be when they get a purchase agreement or something happens down the road. That could be years. And so the staff of the certificate holder that gave the qualifications that help prove they are credible and can meet the requirements of the standard that we're addressing here may change. And so pulls a rug out from under everything, it seems. So without an annual revisit or something like that of the credentials of the certificate holder on the organizational expertise standards, so that's just a general comment.
Thank you for your comment, Secretary Cornett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the record, Todd Cornett. Thank you, Vice Chair Howe. And I think you highlighted an important point is there is tension here. There is tension in that we have an evidentiary process that basically requires applicants to show upfront that they can meet all of the standards. And that's just how the system is developed. But also, the legislature eliminated the need standard for generating facilities in the mid-90s. And so the policy for, for generating facilities is market-based. So these aren't entirely contradictory, but there is tension in this, in what should we require in this element, because there should be, and as Sarah's pointed out, the vast majority of the certificate holders and applicants are limited liability corporations who rely on parent company who don't want the liability. So that's some difficult issues. So, I mean, it's to kind of just point out the obvious, it's complicated and there's tension. And so I think we can and should do different things, but what those are and how we can do those, I think it involves a lot of conversation. So I'll just leave it with that.
Thank you. Councilmember Condon?
You must be able to read my mind.
You know.
Cindy comment for the record, and one, I really want to compliment staff on their grabbing hold of these issues and really going deep in the review process and then bringing it to us in workshop. And a format to be able to have the conversation. So I have, I think what is a pretty elementary question with respect to your explanation, Sarah, focused on the condition, that they meet the conditions. When I am reviewing the material, I see a lot of, or read a lot of statements from the applicants themselves that says we will construct a facility, we'll be beginning construction within 2 years, and there's a timeline presented and whatnot. Certainly not a condition. But are we evaluating the applicant's ability to do what is stated? Not just the conditions we impose, because we don't impose a condition. Well, we do say it shall start, but we allow amendments and whatnot. How does that enter into the evaluation process day? And are there, I mean, the limited liability we've seen, they don't really have much financial, they don't have people, they don't have financial resources. So saying that we can begin construction within a period of time is good luck. And so I'm wondering if there are operating there's been some conversation in the past about operating agreements between parent company and, subsidiary. What that operating agreement, says the responsibility of the parent company is to see that the applicant can perform on not necessarily the conditions, but what they say they do.
Well, in terms of evaluating whether they can actually start when they say they're gonna start, we don't evaluate. Mostly because statute requires council to establish the construction start date, and that has become fairly standardized without it being like substantive, where they have to start in 3 years. It's not based on their ability to start and then it's allowed them to extend. So, and then any other representations that we feel that they have to meet is a condition. Right. So if it's not, I mean, there are representations that should be a condition, but we're missing it, that's something we can think about.
Sorry, Secretary Burnett. For the record, Todd Burnett. I just want to kind of bring up the practical difficulties of that. So, you know, as Sarah pointed out, council for quite some time has sort of landed on that 3-year time frame to begin construction, and that's based upon really more about the staleness of data. You know, when an applicant submits their information and going through the process, and then 3 years later, even after a site certificate, you know, that's sort of kind of where council's landed, and then that data gets stale. And so if they don't begin construction by that date, they need to submit another amendment request because, you know, species can migrate into different areas, you know, new people may move in, there may be new noise sensitive receptors. So, you know, facts on the ground can change within that time frame. It's not 3 years, it's more like 5 years. And so that's kind of where council's landed. But I think that just the practical difficulty is, well, if they say they're going to begin construction, you know, can we hold them to that? Well, we hold them to that by that condition. And if they don't meet it, they have to come back and request an amendment. I just want to kind of throw that out there is, you know, the market, the practicality is very complicated. You know, we've heard some presentations, we know just a fraction, I think, of the complications, you know, that these are really massive facilities. They're very expensive. There's a lot that goes into it. You know, the markets, the power purchase agreements, you know, having construction contractors and supply chain, there's a lot that goes into it. So I just want to throw that out there is if they say they're going to do it, are they going to do it? I don't think they know at that point in time. I think there is a staging element, you know, even beyond sort of the, you know, need standard. There's practically a staging part of this that they're forecasting the possibility to build these facilities if all of these things line up. And I don't think we can really change that on them because I think that's just the reality of the nature of this industry, you know, and the changes in the demands for renewable energy, which is what we're largely seeing, you know, and supply chains and their limitations on the amount of people, you know, construction workers who can actually do this work. So there's a lot of elements that I think we have to be sort of thoughtful about that aren't on our side, that are on their side.
Councilmember Collins. And I appreciate that. I guess how I look at it is that it is the applicant themselves saying, hey, we intend to start construction in a certain amount of time. And in my mind, what can you show me that you have the ability to do that? And if they don't have any money, don't have people, that causes me to question the ability. That's one thing. And this we don't have a mean standard. I get that. But as I look at the landscape as we assess these applications, there is limited landscape available for these projects. And once we issue a site certificate, that certificate is good for a long period of time that somebody, like you say, may never do facility. And that our issuing a site certificate in some ways is a pretty high barrier to prevent anybody else from developing a project on what may be the best parcels for renewable energy generation. And I guess I struggle with that a bit as what are the best chances of getting these facilities built in a timely manner. It doesn't speak to a need standard, but certainly speaks to getting a project done, which is what is presented.
Secretary Burnett, thank you, Councilman Condon.
Yeah, for the record, Pat Barnett. I think there are two elements to that I'd like to respond to. One is, again, council sets a beginning construction deadline and an ending construction deadline. And currently, there is the ability to get 2 3-year time extensions on the beginning construction timeline. We're going to be opening up the amendment rules in 2024. That's where the bulk of that evaluation is going to be done. That can be reevaluated. So there's elements that council has control over there, but then there's also elements that council doesn't have control over. A developer can sign a lease agreement with landowners, and even if they don't have a site certificate, it could lock up that land. So outside of our process, there is a level of control that you do not have. And so if somebody's trying to prevent, a competitor, for example, from building in a prime area, they don't have to build a facility. They just have to get landowners to sign long-term lease agreements, on that land. And it doesn't matter for us if they have a site certificate or not. It's still going to lock up that land because they can't sign with anybody else.
And I agree with that. I'm just trying to control what we can control, which is the issuance of the site certificate to get a project done. That's all I'm trying to reconcile in my mind.
Yeah, and I think these questions, we can kind of look at them in, in a very confined way, which is important, but it's also, there are a lot of different kind of offshoots, and variables that is important to kind of be aware of, because, you can only control what you can control. We have a process, you have rules, that's where your area is, and that's exactly what you should focus. But I think it is worthwhile to be thinking about what are the things that can't.
These discussions and developers, if they are paying attention at all, are going to realize that we're asking more questions, and private citizens have the ability to go out their legislators and raise concerns about some of these things. I think we've been put in a position where the legislature has set some very high expectations. It's almost like the gold rush, right? You're racing out there to go meet something that may or may not happen, but I do believe in controlling what we can, and the best thing that we can do is continue to make it clear that we are not rubber stamping things. We are looking at data. Sarah, to your point, I'm concerned about collecting data that we can't really do anything with. I think that is a wasted resource all the way around. But I do think we're one of our rights to ask questions, and one way to do it might be that we ask more questions when we have developers throughout the process. So that's, in my mind, I don't see this getting any easier, especially as new technologies come on board, and even our conversation this morning about the temporary generators and things. So we're going to continue to see it. There will be a demand for resources. I can tell you from my personal world, supply chain issues are not getting any better. They are not going to get any better anytime quickly, and so we will continue to see that. Anyone else have comments at this time? You think about it? Councilmember Condon?
And I know I have stated this before. It is this standard that that we are responsible for. With other standards, other agencies are responsible for evaluating, and the information is quite intensive. And that's why, yes, that's why I spent so much time on this standard retirement. I said retirement. And while ours, these are ours. And so what is our evidence that we can ask for that we aren't asking for today? And that operating agreement, that someone mentioned to us is that, oh, here is a piece that we haven't heard about or read about before, that may be available, may not be available, but at least it's something that establishes a relationship, some evidence. You know, I don't know what I don't know. What else is out there that would build that evidentiary file? Like we have other standards. There's been complete evidence, evidence strong enough to say, yes, this entity can do what they say they're going to do. Hold on.
We talked about that. We should be a company. This is state line, and then they change the
Next era.
Yeah.
You know, someone's next era. Their financial people. Mention this.
We either got it or we didn't. We can start to ask for that either as a pre-construction condition or.
Yeah, I can just follow up on that. Especially if there's pushback to the performance guarantee, you know, that some were okay with that, and now there's been pushback. That is just, okay, if not that. And the other thing that I would, that we talked about is the structure of the organizations themselves with the staff limited liability companies. And in looking at it, most of them, all of them, are pretty clear that the parent company has no obligation to fulfill the obligations of the subsidiary. And so how do you know, so, okay, that's the case. And we understand how limited liability. What does that say at the alternative is the best?
Thank you. Councilmember Devlin, Councilmember Chalky, do either of you have any comments?
No, not at this time.
Thank you. Secretary Burnett?
Yeah, for the record, Dr. Cornett. And I think, you know, the conversation is good, and I think this is exactly what we're going to do it to see what changes have we made. We certainly, you know, heard council, we made changes, we tried to make some changes, and, you know, and it's going to be iterative. But I just will put this out there that, you know, we have a series of rulemakings that we call the rulemaking alignment. We've got the first one done, which is sort of rearranging things. The second version, phase 2, really is going to be, you know, largely non-substantive as well. That's going to be rearranging things. And it's going to be the third phase, which is going to be more really a bunch of different rulemakings, you know, including the organizational expertise. We're going to look at individual standards to try to then really assess what are we asking for in terms of the application materials and what's the standard. So that's when we're going to really dig into those. So, you know, Tom Jackman's going to be coming back likely in January with a request for the 2024 rulemaking schedule. Certainly the phase 2 will be on that. We'll have to see, you know, where, you know, all the other rulemakings are, whether we can start to get into phase 3 in 2024 or not. But just as a heads up to begin thinking, you can start thinking about what are the prioritizations of the different standards within phase 3 that you want to look at. You know, is organizational expertise the top priority? Is something else the top priority? So begin thinking about that because, as Sarah's brought these up, we can do things, certainly within the context without rulemaking, and we've done that. Ultimately, I think rulemaking is the way to go. And it's on the radar. It's out there, whether it's 2024 or shortly thereafter, into it soon enough. But just so you can begin thinking about what your priorities are for us.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you very much, Sarah, for that useful explanation and facilitating our conversation. We appreciate you. We are now at a time where I think lunch is here. We can grab lunch and take a break and continue on. So I don't know how much time you all would like to have to do that. And how much time?
15.
We'll take 15 minutes and we will be back at 11:55. I think I see you.
Hold on. There you go.
Okay, the time is 11:35 and we're gonna return from recess and resume our meeting. The next agenda item is agenda item H. We have Northwest Natural's Mist Underground Natural Gas Storage Facility overview. This is an information item. We have Andy Bauer, manager with environmental compliance, and Dave Weber, VP gas supply to present. Gentlemen?
Good morning. You guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to talk. Go to the next slide. Thanks. So what we've got here is just an overview of our service territory. Right? What we're talking about is this the triangle just north of the Vancouver figure. And a little bit about us. We're the largest independent natural gas utility in the Pacific Northwest. We're founded in 1859. A little bit of history. We're about 6 weeks older than the state of Oregon. Wow. Wow. State of Oregon, I think, was incorporated in February 14, 1859, and January. Yeah, early January. We serve about 2.5 million people in Oregon and Southwest Washington. You can see our territory in Washington across the river there. I'm really as big as what we've done in Oregon. We've got roughly 1,200 employees. And besides you guys, we're also regulated by the Oregon PUC and the Washington Utilities and Transportation. And if I needed to, I could probably give you a list of acronyms of other regulated. So I'm going to hand these off to Dave. He's going to talk about our Miller Station in North Mist and the mist storage field as a whole. One thing I'll promise you is the mist storage field is one of the 3 sectors that we're going to focus just on the storage field today.
Thank you, everybody. Weber, I'm the gas supply and utility support services, gas supply for Northwest Natural, a number of different supporting organizations, including all of our storage plants. I've been with Northwest Natural as an employee and contractor for years, and been involved in a lot of projects and work up at the storage facilities we hold up there. Being involved in our last site in then. So we're going to talk about the mist storage facility that Northwest Natural has. We're fortunate in Oregon to have the geologic structure to allow us to store natural gas and to have had it actually happen. So we discovered natural gas up in this field almost 40 years ago. And this was natural gas that was naturally buried trapped in sandstone up in this area. Mineral oil, and other liquids associated with it, such as pure natural gas. And some of the reservoirs have nitrogen in it, but it's basically methane and some nitrogen. So the underground portion of this facility is regulated by Oregon's Department of Geology and Mineral Industries and damming. We're also regulated underground by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. So they both
audit us and require us to meet their standards. So I would just say that the dam needs standards, which went into effect before we started this facility, are up to and exceeded the current standards that have been in place since the incident that happened in this. Very high standards for underground storage facility that we agree to. So the standard gas is trapped in these reservoirs, which have caprock above them. Some of this is volcanic in nature. And so this sandstone imagine the beach, but with a little bit of hold together. If you have this sandstone, it'll crumble in your hand. So it's very porous and very permeable. So if you pour water on it, it'll treat you like the beach, except that it has enough connectivity that it'll hold together. But like I said, it'll crumble. So that's the kind of sandstone. Next slide, please. So this storage is a core part of the energy supply in the Northwest, and we use that comes in two forms. One is that we store 21.6 billion cubic feet of natural gas underground in these reservoirs. One of the reservoirs serves, we talk about that a little bit, PG&E's Port Westward generating facilities, and we have a pipeline that directly connects up to natural gas storage facility to them. So they're able to use this facility to follow the wind. So when the wind is blowing too hard and there's high-speed cutouts, they're able to provide electric generation using Port Westward too. And we also support them their Beaver facility in Port Westward 1. They can have run during the time frames when they need. So it's flexible. We use this gas storage also to provide balancing facilities for us. For the natural gas supply customers in Oregon. Next slide. So what that means to us is that, so we model maximum natural gas usage by Northwest Natural customer on the coldest, most difficult. So right now that's 1 billion cubic feet of gas for every 1 day. We're close to that amount. So in order to meet that demand, we have a number of different spots. So the pipelines that serve the Northwest, well, our maximum amount of pipeline capacity is only about 40% of that natural gas demand. We have LNG facilities at Portland and at Newport that provide, and then we have other agreements with customers, industrial customers, and others to supply us natural gas. But 30% of that comes from this. So on a cold day in February, which is usually the model day, although our maximum demand was last December, we actually delivered about 800,000 decatherms, so close to 0.8 billion cubic feet, so 800,000 feet on average. This was the core part of that. So this facility is essential to us, right? And so we've been in this business for a long time. So next slide.
Is it okay to ask questions during your presentation?
Certainly.
I missed the depth in the of the reservoir.
So we're on 3,000 feet. So there are facilities a lot deeper, but this is actually a pretty good depth. So the mist storage facility, so we discovered natural gas, Northwest Natural did, back in 1970, so well over 40 years ago. And we produced that natural gas and delivered it to customers, but with the expectation that we would put it into storage service. So our site certificates for this facility are regional site certificate goes back well over 30 years ago. So during the time frame after 1989, we went into service, we made a number of different advances, and we've gone through the 12 amendments for this facility. So it's not a new facility, and we've done a lot of increase the capability of the facility to serve our customers and to serve interstate storage customers through improvements in the compression of the facility, which I'll talk
and including additional reservoirs up there that have natural gas. In 2004, we have a separate amendment for a pipeline called the Southwest Pipeline Expansion. So it's a separate DESEC approved facility that serves brings natural gas. In 2019, we completed a North Mist expansion project that I just described that supports Portland General Electric, which was amendments 11 and 12. 11 was the majority, but we needed to make another amendment to handle some water modifications. Next slide, please. So we're just talking about amendment 11, which was the bulk of the last thing that there. I talked about PGE. So this more or less illustrates how we built a pipeline that's 13 miles from the Northwest compressor stations connected to Fort Westford. So gas comes off the pipeline and Fort Westward. We take it up and store it in a single reservoir that has 4 billion cubic feet in it. And then when PGE wants that gas, they literally do not have to call us. The gas is delivered on what we call no notice service, which is, as far as we know, unique. So they literally can turn on their generating, and their generating capacity for Westward 2 can come on in about less than 5 minutes. So with less than 5 minutes, then the gas will start flowing. We're able to do that because of the way we design that facility. So this allows them to electronically dispatch this to support the wind in the facility and how it's designed. And the critical component of that facility is this storage facility. So we directly support that on a regular basis. So during that, when we call older periods of time, when there's so much generation demand, they'll build the facility. You can have it in the summer and service remote. So that is a core part of what we do in this facility. In this facility, we're exploring opportunities to increase the capacity of the facility, both from a deliverability standpoint as well as a pure volumetric equation. Right? So deliverability is how fast the gas goes down the pipeline, and capacity is how long you can. And to give capacity to additional customers and to allow PGE to do more with this facility that we're considering. Next slide. So a couple of pictures here, a little hard to see, but I think you can put them on your monitor. The top one is Miller Station, which sits up above Mist. Actually, this Oregon, if you look on the map, it's maybe it's the crow flies over this location. And this is a snowy day, in contrast with the sunny day where we took a picture below this North Mist compressor station. So you can see they're laid out differently. North Mist is benefits from the location that we were able to make flat and wide open, whereas Miller Station, when it was developed, there isn't a lot of flat land. It's on multiple tiers there. But both of these facilities are up in this area up in the forest. Is owned by a number of different entities, warehouses with all our Miller Station has 17.5 billion cubic feet and can deliver up to 515 billion cubic feet per day. So that's a pretty high weight. The capacity for Northwest Natural was right around 400 million cubic feet. So that's how big that is. 15,000 total compressor horsepower and 7 reservoirs. So there's 7 reservoir formations where we store gas. North Mist is smaller, about the size 4 million cubic feet of working gas capacity. It's in one reservoir. We have about 120 million maximum quality and 3,750. The pipeline, I don't list the pipeline, but it's 13. So moving on, next slide. The Miller Station has two turbine compressors, so one of these turbine compressors was installed over 25 years ago, and the other over 20 years ago. They are used a lot in the facility because they have a wide range of operating characteristics, and so during the year, we use these compressors to compress gas to inject into the ground because the pipeline pressure versus the pressure we want to store in the reservoir. These reservoirs range in maximum pressure from 800 pounds per square inch to around 1100. That's stored underground, and that goes to depth, right? The deeper the reservoir is, the higher the pressure. And then when we withdraw, as the pressure drops in the reservoir, in order to raise it to the pressure we want to. There are other facility components of the Miller Station that I didn't mention. When the gas goes into the ground, it goes in dry. The pipeline, it'll condense and also freeze, which creates operational issues that we work through when we work to them away. So when we take the gas out of the ground, we dehydrate it. We flow that gas through a shower of glycol, and that glycol likes the water better than the gas does. So the glycol picks up the water. We heat up the glycol, which is a component. And that glycol then gas, the water vaporizes, and goes to the atmosphere. The glycol can be circulated through the pumps. Continues to do its job. So we're able to work through that process. These compressors are, one has over 35,000 hours, close to 40,000 hours, the other one has 55,000 hours. Both of these compressors are aviation derivative engines, so they were available at that time, and there are a lot fewer of them today than there were then. They're very hard to get parts for. And so we're exploring and worked on plans to replace them with modern, I would say modern stuff, but they're not modern. We want to go to industrial engines instead of aviation engines because many more of them have been made. Parts are much more readily available. These engines can then be swapped out later. So, as we've described, it's very important to us in our operation and we need equipment that we can rely on. And then if it does fail, we can. These engines are making it difficult. We have a very resourceful engineer, but they're also very expensive. So we're looking to do that with these. The next slide. So Miller Station also has two reciprocating engine compressors, which so you're familiar with diesel engines. They're very durable machines, very easy to get parts for. And they are workhorses for us, but they have a much narrower operating band. We can use them for smaller flow rates. So the big engines can do 200,000 cubic feet of gas movement, whereas these are around 40. One of those others is over. So significantly smaller flow rates. We take advantage of these engines quite a bit. But as they said, they're proven to be very reliable. We made some investments in it. They're holding it very well for us. So the next slide. North Mist, when we developed North Mist, we decided to use reciprocating engines for the reasons I just described. Nice and durable, these two reciprocating engines are Caterpillar industrial engines. There's a Caterpillar vendor with repair folks down in Hillsborough. So it's not hard for us to get parts up there and get repaired, so it's much less difficult to repair and maintain. And just gives you a picture of what they are. That's all we had to describe facilities up there. Any questions about the storage?
Yes, but I will go to Pierce first. Anyone have any questions? Cindy?
Sure, can you go back to the picture slide with the sea level and the cap rock? So the light circles, so if the gas in that lower, all below the cap rock,
Yes.
and so in that darker level, the dark brown level above the cap rock, so there are those bubbles in there too?
No.
Is that- No.
Yeah, gases, there's no gas, well, we've only discovered gas in wells that have been drilled a lot deeper than this to try to explore other levels, but we've only discovered gas. There's only suitable storage in that particular space.
Okay, so there were no bubbles above there.
Yes,
Okay.
the bubble.
Well, not the gas.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Thank you.
no, sorry, illustration.
Yeah, no, so it's all below the cap rock level down to about 3,000.
Yes. And we test the cap rock, so we drill a well into it and we test the cap rock, we just test it to determine what its strength capabilities are. So before the damming wall allows us to store gas, we have to validate that the cap rock is.
So, for the record, this is Marcy Braille, and two questions. One, geographically in my mind, you're out where the elk viewing area is.
Not quite, we're 20 miles.
Just trying to get my, I live in Columbia County.
So if you were to drive, we're 447 and 202 split. 47 heads towards Claxon, 202 heads towards the coast, or by
Okay.
If you look north, you would be looking at the North Station.
right.
And are they manned, are they manned?
24/7. I mean, they're during the day, during the week, a dozen or more people. In the middle of the night, there are 2 people up there.
Thank you. Other questions?
I want to make sure I understand that this is, I don't even know if I'm supposed to ask questions. I'm in charge. So this is naturally occurring gas in the mist catch growth area. The gas is naturally occurring in the mist area.
So yes, there was naturally occurring gas in this area. And we simply used that space that the gas had occupied before to store gas.
So the gas that you're storing there now, where's it coming from?
It comes from the pipeline. So wherever that gas came from the pipeline, the gas comes across that pipeline from the north from British Columbia and from the east from Alberta.
So it's if you notice by 5 or 8, it's like 8. So the north, the photo on the top is Miller Station, and everything that is above the road that you see there is ours. Items below the on the right, that's not ours. They actually have production. Regular production. Some production area. Yeah.
Other questions?
Jordan, this is Jordan. Big turbines that.
Brady, Young, Club, basically think turbo shaft engine. Whereas in in my world, aviation, those engines would exhaust gases up the propulsion of the airplane. But we take those gases and put them in what's called a power. All that energy rotates the compressor. So the 3 parts, a gas generator, which is what you're thinking about, and there's a power turbine to take that energy period. And then there's actually a rotating unit that is being driven by that, where the natural gas comes in and is compressed. Downstairs. It is driven by basically an aviation engine. Yes.
Okay. The one thing I would add to is all the compression that we have. Maybe diesel engines at some point or small engines.
City comment for the record. Alderman Key. So glad, Patrick, thank you. Where did that come from? Between 1979 and 1989, that gas flowed through the pipeline, leaving an empty
Yes,
space.
yes,
And so now, okay, use that for storage, and that was.
yes. And in one reservoir, there, we actually decided to put it immediately in the storage. The gas came out, went into the system for our customers, then we put gas right. As opposed to producing the gas, letting the reservoir wait and then develop. So it was immediately.
Mr. Howe?
One of the slides shows the different engines that are huge horsepower pushing that stuff down, the gas down. When you want to use it, does it just come up, or do you have to have energy to bring it up?
So it comes out two ways. So when you're full, the gas comes out what we call free flow. So the gas comes out at sufficient pressure to overcome the pipeline. So you flow it out, take it through the dehydrators and put it on a pipeline, send it to. This is connected to our customers. And when you get to a certain point that it's insufficient pressure, then you bring on compression to boost the pressure until you get it.
So you're using the engines to push pressure down that will cause the gas that you want to come up.
Now
Or you're sucking
it's
it.
like a straw.
It's a straw. Okay, got it.
The opposite will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pressure, flow injection as well. So pressure is only needed if you don't have enough. Something in that direction.
This is, I like the graphic that showed the connection with PGE for full disclosure, IBW. I did not realize that. I think that's pretty interesting when we talk about, all the sources that we need to make the grid work. Everybody's connected. So I thought that was kind of neat. I like that. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Well, we appreciate you visiting with us and sharing.
So-
Terry Cornett, go for it.
Just one sort of point, so this is, really helpful, most council members, because this facility's been around for a long time, and most of you probably weren't here when the last amendment was done. So it's nice to get like an overview, but really this is a preview because there are proposed amendments in the near future. And this was really outside of the amendment, just to kind of bring council members up to speed because we deal with wind facilities and solar facilities and even transmission facilities, and those are kind of a known quantity, as complicated as they can be. This is an entirely different thing. It's a one-off thing. It's been around for a long time. Council has had a lot of experience with this, but current council members really have not. And so the purpose and value of this was really just to re-engage council so you understood what the facility is, what it's used for, how it's used, and sort of prepare you a little bit more for when an amendment comes in to have that background and understanding, of what the facility does, before you even start looking at what's proposed for.
Thank you for that clarification, Vice Chair Howe.
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking them to come and do that presentation. So it's great and a good presentation as well. I wanted to ask though, back in, was it 1859 when the business started?
Yes.
What were they doing at that time? Were they drilling for gas? Were they drilling for oil or something completely?
They were doing street lights for forward. And they were manufacturing gas, down about where, only was sort of like R2D2, artistic license. And then they're, out of coal. So that you could kind of gas the license. Put on the gas.
It's important gas and coal.
Coke.
Oh, coke.
Is a part of the process. To create coke.
Yeah, yeah.
They would create their gas, that they would then sell, yes. The company, lots of evolution from that. When natural gas arrived in the fifties, it dramatically changed the way that the business, the natural gas business in the United States changed.
And then to add, you guys are planning to,
Secretary Burnett?
Yeah, and I don't remember the last time we were talking about it. We had a meeting in Glasgow, and at that time, what was it?
my person.
We had a tour, this was associated with, that last amendment, and so, council members have been out there, council members, if you're interested in willing. It really helps understand, because we deal with sort of photos and aerial photographs, and those are helpful, and, we talk a lot about what these things are, and what potential impacts are, but getting on the ground is actually really valuable. And so, if council members are interested, we would certainly encourage that, and we can set that up. The only complication would be, if there are enough council members to constitute a quorum, and is that a council meeting? Beyond that, it absolutely would be a valuable exercise if anybody's interested. So we'll just appreciate the offer, and, as staff, we will help support that offer if council members are interested.
I think that is fantastic and thank you for coming and the CS will look forward to seeing you as presented in 2024.
I have
Well,
one more
hold on.
question. Councilmember Klein. Yes, okay. Just related to, conversation we had, and issue, or item we had at the beginning of the meeting. So the Northwest facility is dedicated to PGE and only comes on. Kind of related to standby generator, what we were talking about. Beginning of this meeting, standby generation, that's really the use of this.
Now, PGE would consider it a generating facility that they use. It can be running 24 hours a day, and it's feeding the grid. It's not feeding a specific site. So we send them natural gas. They can run any one of their generating plants. And the generated power that they produce goes on the grid. As opposed to what you were talking about earlier, which is locally. This is their power goes to you.
Okay, yeah, and I was thinking of it as, this product going to PGE, what PGE does with it is a different.
No, we're an independent facility for them, but they use our natural gas to generate. So we give them gas, they generate electricity. We don't give them power.
And Port Westward is an F-SEC jurisdiction.
Yes. Yes.
They mentioned the Beaver plant. That would be an F-SEC jurisdictional facility, other than the fact that it was constructed prior to sort of F-SEC jurisdictional statutes and rules. So it's big enough to be an F-SEC jurisdictional facility, and it's Portland General Electric, but it predates those statutes and rules. So that one actually is not within F-SEC jurisdiction.
Yeah, and I was just trying to make the distinction between Northwest, which is just PGE, that's point.
It's just natural gas supply.
Yeah, it's PGE, whereas Miller goes to pipeline.
It goes,
Sure.
well, it goes to Northwest Natural customers and also.
Okay.
Yeah. We have a local distribution pipelines, and then there's the pipeline or the interstate. I differentiate between interstate pipeline and the pipelines that we operate. The gas goes one places, but principally it goes to Northwest Natural customers.
And the other two sites. Store customers.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again for coming in and presenting to the team.
Thank you.
So, friends, here's my little list here. So that gets us through our formal agenda. Does anyone have any further comments or questions on council? Secretary Cornett? Yeah. All right, well, then, the time is now 12:10, and I would like to say, Nancy, thank you. I know other staff colleagues said, as you were managing this on your phone, we appreciate your efforts. And, the time is now 12:10, and the November 17th, 2023 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council is now adjourned.